Smart move.
All right, let's see. Oh, I got 50-ish, 50. Okay, so people are joining in after dinner. Okay. Well, Happy New Year, everyone. We're going to get started. It's a few minutes after 7. And welcome. I'm so pleased you've joined the Friends of San Pedro Valley Park's Natural Sciences series. I'm Mila Stroganoff, Programs Director and Field Trips Director for the Friends, and your host tonight. We have Dr. Thomas Parker with us to enlighten us on manzanitas and their animals, keys to evolution. It will be an enlightening lecture. Tom Parker has been our January speaker for a few years, and I'm very pleased that he has agreed to join us tonight. I will introduce him in just a moment. Moving on. At the end of tonight's lecture, we will have a Q&A session, and we'll take some questions and read some comments. We'll see how much time we have after the lecture. Please write questions in the question section, and chat should be working today, and I believe it is because we just had a question that popped in on chat. And so if you want to communicate something not too direly important, put it in chat and we'll try and reply. But I'm usually busy listening, so, give me a break too. And the lecture will be recorded. It is being recorded and will be up on the website in a couple of days. Our website is none other than friendsofsanpedrovalleypark.org. And while I have your attention, consider becoming a member and supporting the programming. I should mention that we will hold a beginner birding class in early March here in Pacifica, led by J.R. Blair. This is our second one, and the class will consist of 4 two-hour lectures and 2 field trips. And it will be limited to 15 people. More information will be made available later this month. We'll be sending out, or Adrian does that, of course. Adrian will be sending out emails later this month once we've finalized the form. And the webinar on February 28th, Saturday, at 7 p.m. will be given by Craig Nikitas about the Cooper's hawk and will include a comparison to sharp-shinned hawks. And that will help those of us who are taking the class and also anyone interested in identifying birds when in the field. So please join us for that particular webinar in February. And now I have the great pleasure of introducing our speaker. Dr. Tom Parker is professor of biology at San Francisco State University for 40 years, now Emeritus. He is currently the editor-in-chief of Madroño, the Western America Journal of Botany, a publication of the California Botanical Society. He is a plant ecologist and evolution focusing on plant community dynamics and conservation. Tom Parker is an expert in the systematics and ecology of Arctostaphylos species. He has done research on dispersal, seed banks, seedling establishment, and fire response, mycorrhizae, and other aspects of ecology and evolution in a variety of California vegetation types, especially chaparral and tidal wetlands. So, Tom, please take it away.
Okay.
I'll change the view back to speaker view and then
So Mila, can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can see you on the wide screen, the big screen is all you. So now we need the big screen being all PowerPoint.
All
If you
right.
want to.
That means I can go.
Yes, I can hear you. Yes.
All right. First of all, I'd like to say it's always a pleasure and an honor to give talks to this group. I'm disappointed we're not doing this in person because I kind of like to see faces when I talk about things. But the good news is I really love Manzanita, so I can do this talk just talking to myself. Um, if you have questions, put them in the chat and we'll get to them at some point. Okay. We're going to talk about manzanitas, and I want to let you see a little bit about animals that they interact with and how those animals have influenced some of their characteristics. Um, we'll start by reminding you that manzanitas are the most diverse woody plant group in California. There's over 100 taxa, uh, nearly 70 species, and the rest are subspecies. They grow throughout the California floristic province. Some of them scoot up the coast to British Columbia, a lot of them up the Cascades. A couple of species have invaded the Rocky Mountains, and one species is global in the Northern Hemisphere, but in Arctic and alpine environments, and that's Arctostaphylos uva-ursi, or bearberry, you might know it. So that's a really diverse group and lots of different circumstances, but most of them occur in California chaparral, and that's the context that we'll be talking about. Chaparral is a semi-arid vegetation, enough moisture and productivity that they can create a closed canopy system. But it is dry in summer. We do have a Mediterranean climate, and because of that, we sometimes get fire. And manzanitas have a peculiar adaptation, as do almost all plants in chaparral. They recover rapidly, so that within a few years, you really can't tell that there was a fire in the chaparral zone. Manzanitas, in particular, have seed whose dormancy is released by fire, and as a consequence, they germinate right after fires in the spring that follows. Now, most of the species, believe it or not, are located near the coast, within the fog layer or close by. And so they're not the tough kinds of chaparral, semi-desert kinds of plants you might be thinking of. They're actually relatively mesic for chaparral. A couple of species are really tough, but they grow in places where it's hard, but it's not too hard. And if you look at the map on the right side, that's the coastal fog of California. Wherever there is a break in the coastal mountains, the manzanitas proliferate. So in the Bay Area, we have a large number of local endemics. That's also true of Monterey Bay. It's also true of Morro Bay and the Santa Ynez Valley. All of those places where there are holes in
Tom,
coast ranges.
Tom,
Yes,
sorry to interrupt, but there's nothing up, no PowerPoint at all.
there's no what?
There's no PowerPoint up at all.
Well, I can see mine.
We see you, but we don't see any PowerPoint.
Okay. Where is the share? Oh, here we go. Share. We'll try that again.
We need, yeah. And now we need to expand it to full screen.
Okay, now do you see it?
Now we persist. Yes.
Okay,
Thank you.
perfect.
Yes. You
I'll
want to go
do the
back to the
context over again.
yeah, can you go back to the beginning and see some of those photos?
Oh, we don't need to go all the way back.
No? Okay.
Why not? Hello. Okay, here's the pictures that were up when I was talking about the diversity of the group and the context of chaparral and wildfire, post-fire recovery, and the fact they have dormant seeds. And fire breaks the dormancy, and that permits them to germinate in the following spring. Okay, now we're caught up. Most of the species are along the coast, and where there are breaks in the mountains, like the Bay Area, Monterey Bay, Morro Bay, and the Santa Ynez Valley, you have a proliferation of a lot of local endemic species. That just lets you know that these plants are really pretty sensitive to subtle shifts in the climate. They are extremely well adapted to the California vegetation and to fog and to our really diverse kinds of soils. So speaking of that, upper left-hand side, serpentine, with a lot of endemic manzanitas. On the other side, the upper right, sand dunes. In the middle toward the bottom, granite soils, which are really rare in the coast ranges. Each one of these has a number of local endemic species of manzanitas that have proliferated in all these slightly different climatic and geological spots. So I want to focus on the animal aspect of how they adapt because you're probably used to hearing about how things have adapted to our climate. Um, but animals are a part of how they've adapted. So the birds, the mammals, the insects, they all are involved in keeping manzanitas apart. And I think I'll start by just letting you know that they're in a small subfamily, the Arbutoideae. It's a very old subfamily of the blueberry and rhododendron family. It's also one of the most derived genera. So that means it's pretty recent, but it's not that recent. It's at least 15 million years old because that's how far the fossils go back. Arbutus is quite old. Fossils go back over 30 million years. That means it's gone through multiple huge climatic shifts in North America. We have four other genera, Coumarostaphylos, Ornithostaphylos, and Xylococcus. These are all close relatives. There's only one other member of this subfamily, but these are the ones that you can find in California. Arbutus, the madrone, is a tree. It's a beautiful one. You're probably familiar with it in the Bay Area. It has that lovely bark. It produces fleshy fruit. There's a lot of horticultural members of this genus, the strawberry tree. You might be familiar with that as well. Coumarostaphylos also has fleshy fruit, similar flowers. It has fairly large leaves, not as large as Arbutus, but bigger than Manzanitas. It grows mostly in San Diego County and Baja California. It's a single species. It has a population on one of the Channel Islands, but all the other species of Coumarostaphylos are in Mexico. We only have the one. The other three genera have some different kinds of characters. Ornithostaphylos, or the Baja bird bush, is a fairly large shrub. It has smooth bark like madrones, but its bark is white. And it also has fruit that mature, but the fruit dries at maturity rather than being a fleshy, succulent fruit. And that dryness is a very distinct character. The mission manzanita Xylococcus also has dry fruit in the upper right corner. Unusual color, though. They dry to a black color. What I'd like to point out is in the middle picture, you can see some structures at the tips of the stem. Those are juvenile inflorescences that won't flower until the next winter, once the rains arrive. And Ornithostaphylos and Xylococcus and Arctostaphylos all produce these juvenile inflorescences. We call them nascent inflorescences. And they come at the end of stem growth and then they go dormant right after they start growing. They just stop and then stay dormant until the next year, the next growing season. And so that's an unusual character, but it's an important character because it gives them a head start in the next growing season. So if we look at what some of the shifts are occurring in this subfamily, all of the genera are shrubs except for Arbutus. And they vary in size, but they're basically trees versus shrubs. If you start looking at other characters like the fruit, Arbutus and Coumarostaphylos have that fleshy fruit, and they also flower later in the spring. So if you want to go see them bloom, you have to wait till late April or May or sometimes even June before they start to bloom. The others, Ornithostaphylos, Xylococcus, and Arctostaphylos, they not only produce dry fruit when they mature, but they also flower much earlier. So Arbutus and Coumarostaphylus basically are queuing to climate changes, but also with day length. And they need the day to get longer and longer before they're stimulated to flower. The lower three species do not seem to care about day length. They just care about water. And if they get a very big rain, they will burst into growth and start flowering. You can mess with them if you've got them in your yard. You can go out in late July when it's very dry and just heavily water them, and they will all start flowering for you. Now, you've kind of messed them up for a year or two, but you can make it happen. A key character that occurs only in Arctostaphylos is that they have come up with a mutation that permits them to produce seed that stays dormant. The other genera have what are called transient seed, and all that means is that the fruit produce seed, the seed get into the soil, and they either make it or they don't within a single year. Arctostaphylos, on the other hand, produces physiologically and physically dormant seed that are buried in the soil, and dormancy isn't broken except by a fire. They need a heat pulse from the fire, but they mostly need chemicals from the smoke of fire. And they also probably need a chilling of winter before the dormancy is fully broken. And then they can germinate in the early spring. That's an important difference because that means if they have dormant seed, they start to accumulate seed in the soil. And that gives us opportunity to start interacting with our animals. So the shifts that you're seeing in the subfamily seem to look like responses to harsh environments like fire and drought. The idea that things like Arctostaphylos and close relatives would flower really early and produce dry fruit, that seems pretty reasonable with respect to escaping having succulent fruit during the middle of the dry stress season in summer. But there's other things going on too. All of these characters are interactive with their animal environments, and sometimes the animals are a key part of the adaptation that you're seeing, and that's what we'll look at next. So if you think about the reproductive traits, because that's a key issue that gives you some insight, these two genera produce fleshy fruits that they don't mature until the end of summer or into fall, and they're bird dispersed. Then you get to the dry fruit species, they mature late May, early June, and they're dry through the summer. They basically fall off the plants, and rodents are the dispersal agent. So something totally different. We're investing a little bit, insects, birds, and lots of mammals. And before we get into that, I want you to contemplate something about yourself. You're a human. You have vision and smell and lots of other senses. But I want you to think about the fact that plants are in a bigger, broader world than you are. And as a human, we tend to have a bias. We tend to compare things to what we can see, to what we can smell. But animals see different things and smell different things. And that's the world that plants have to deal with. So let's think about it with respect to like humans versus bees. And this is the visual spectrum. Bees can see in the red area or can't see in the red area, but they can see in the ultraviolet, and that's on the left side. Humans, we can't see in that ultraviolet, but we can see the red. If a plant wanted to attract humans and not bees, they might produce red flowers. And that works for birds because birds can see in the red. And so a lot of red flowers are basically pollinated by birds. But the bees can see in the ultraviolet. Here's an interesting idea. Here's a monkey flower on the left. That's human vision. On the right, it's under a UV light. So we can't see anything in the UV light, but bees can see this nectar guide. And that is a whole bunch of flavonoids that are absorbing the UV light and creating that darkness. And that darkness tells the bees, follow me down and you'll find the nectar. So the plants are not appealing as much to us as they are to bees. But they have multiple colors to appeal to different kinds of animals that have different sets of vision. In fact, mammals are pretty variable as well. Dogs and cats don't have the same vision that we do. Dogs, for example, on the left side, they can't really see in the red very well, um, but they can see in the ultraviolet much farther than we can. So they have a different view of the world than their owners do. Cats, on the other hand, don't see red very well, but they have lots of what are called rod cells, and they can see at night quite well, much better than us. They don't need much light to be able to see things. Pretty different. All mammals are a little bit variable compared to what you might think of as humans as the default, but we're not really the default. Everybody is adapting to the world that they have to live in. And that's true for plants too. And when you get to odors, it's the same world. In fact, for most mammals, they have a proportionately larger olfactory bulb in their brains, which means they have a better spectrum and sensitivity to smells than humans do. And it's not that we're pathetic. We have really good smell capability. But if you've ever walked the dog, you know they sense the world totally different from us. And insects can as well. Here's one of the champions. This male silk moth can detect a single pheromone molecule of a female moth that it's looking for from up to 7 miles away. And it can orient to where that molecule came from and start flying toward the female. Now, plants can turn it around sometimes. For example, this plant on the right, Ceratocarium argenteum, this is in South Africa. What this plant has done is produce seed that are round and hard, and they emit volatile compounds. And these volatile compounds are identical to the ones that come from the scat or the dung of antelope-like animals in the same habitat. So the dung beetles love to collect the actual dung of the antelopes, and they roll it around and bury it and lay eggs on it so that their eggs can hatch and eat the dung. But these plants have faked them out and get them to roll the seed and then bury the seed as if it was dung. And that's critical for the Ceratocarium because this is a similar kind of habitat to chaparral. It is a wildfire Mediterranean climate system, and the seeds need to be buried to be able to survive wildfire. So sometimes plants can turn the whole system around. Kind of cool. So that's just a little brief foray, and I just want to convince you that as a human, you have a little bit of a bias because your senses are limited, and I want you to open up to realizing that plants don't have that opportunity. Plants have to deal with a variety of mammals, a variety of insects, a variety of birds, and they have to be able to close function to select the right things to attract some and repel others. So here's our plant. This is a nice, beautiful one in Serpentine, Northern California. These plants have to tolerate the summer drought, the occasional fire, the poor soils that they have to deal with. Sometimes, and increasingly so, there is excessive heat. And sometimes, increasingly so, there is excessive freezing. So they have to morphologically and osmotically or chemically be able to deal with all of these things. They don't have the option of putting a jacket on or going inside a house. They also have an entire animal world of herbivores, of pollinators, of fruit dispersal agents, and of seed predators. And in each one of these cases, they have to be able to attract the pollinators, but repel the herbivores, attract the fruit dispersal agents, but repel the predators that will eat the seed. So it's a very complex world. They have to be able to do all of this simultaneously, and they're very successful at doing that. So that's the thing to keep in mind. So if we start with some herbivores, plants, as you know, is where the energy of the world for living organism comes from. Photosynthesis is able to fix the solar energy of the sun into carbon compounds, and that's what drives life on this planet. So everybody wants to eat a plant. And these plants have a variety of insects that attack them. Here's a good example of a leaf miner that has gone through there and eaten them. But I want you to think a little bit. If you've ever seen a manzanita, you're not going to eat a leaf of a manzanita. They are tough. They are filled with fibers. It's like eating a soft piece of wood. So they have developed morphology to tolerate not only drought, but a lot of different kinds of herbivores. For insects like this, they have to come up with chemicals that are toxic that can inhibit them. And in the case of this particular leaf miner, clearly it has figured out how to detoxify that. And that's a little thing called reciprocal evolution. So the plants have all these insects and mammals that are trying to consume them. And what they do is occasionally a mutation arises, and in later generations it spreads because it can inhibit or kill off a lot of the herbivores. But things like insects reproduce at a much faster rate, and eventually they come up with a mutation that can detoxify those compounds. And that reciprocal evolution of the plants coming up with a compound, the certain groups of animals solving it, plants coming up with more toxins, a smaller group of animals figuring out how to detoxify it. That reciprocal evolution of ultimately ends up with some animals being specialists on plants, on a certain kind of plant. These two tortricid moths that you see are specialists on manzanitas. You don't really find them on anything else, except for maybe a close relative like madrone in the case of the marmara. The other one is only found on manzanitas. And what they do is they sense odor that comes from early growth of stems, and they quickly find it. They lay eggs, the eggs hatch, and the new larvae form a web and pull all those new leaves together, and then they consume them. It's really hard to get rid of these, but it's fortunately there are never an awful lot of them. There are a lot of other insects as well that can be found on manzanitas and consume them. It's a really complex world for manzanitas to figure out how to be selected to deal with all of these huge diversity of insects. You might have seen these red galls on the edges of leaves. These galls are formed by aphids. These aphids have co-evolved with manzanitas and are only found on manzanitas. It's the genus Tamalia. They have figured out how to not only detoxify the compounds that manzanitas produce, but they can stimulate the manzanita into forming this gall for them to live on the inside of. Other aphids also invade these galls because the galls protect them from their own predators while they're able to consume parts of the plant. This group is so specialized in manzanitas that there's one species of the aphid that is only found on a single manzanita, the big berry manzanita, Arctostaphylos glauca. It's an incredible little group. Here's an example of how many insects you might find associated with manzanitas. This is a result of a 5-year study. The scientists would go out, put a sheet under the plants, beat them with a broom, collect all the insects that drop out. They would use sweep nets, all sorts of different ways of trapping insects. And he was able to come up with over 500 different kinds of insects, nearly 200 of which were herbivorous, and probably a lot of them were specialists on manzanitas. But of course, you have a lot of herbivores, you're going to have a lot of predators that want to eat those herbivores, and a lot of parasitoids that want to parasitize both the predators and the herbivores, and then scavengers that come up and eat all the debris. So it's a very interesting little world that a single manzanita might have associated with it. A lot of diversity that they have to deal with. Okay, fungi can get in the picture as well. This is Exobasidium vaccinii. It can infect new growth, and you'll see it as a red stem. And that red stem will last until the fungus produces spores and disperses them. Then the stem tends to fall off. They don't really attack too much. You can find them occasionally, and I've never seen a stand with a huge number of them. So they do impact the plants, but it never seems to be a gigantic impact. Really cool, though. Very beautiful. And a lot of the manzanita barks, sometimes they die back, and that turns out to be good habitat for some animals. The photo on the right, all those dead-looking stems, they're actually all alive. It's just that the red part of the bark is underneath most of the stems, as if the growth can be sunburned or something and it not able to tolerate it. Nobody really understands what's going on with this bark striping. On the left, you can see there was a dead area, and then the stem continued to grow, and it created this little canyon in there, and that becomes a good habitat for animals, small animals like insects, spiders, and things like that. And the primary group that inhabit those are, in fact, native ants. It's a pretty large diversity. Some of them are specialized to manzanitas. They've only been found on manzanitas, like in the lower left, the Pseudomyrmex apache. A lot of them are more generalists. So whenever you're crawling around on the ground in manzanitas, you might not want to stick your finger in those places.
Mm-hmm.
Also, not directly associated with evolution of manzanitas, but a lot of insectivorous birds live off those insects and live in the chaparral shrubs. So black phoebes are the ones that kind of dash out to catch flying ones. The wren tits, you probably may not have seen, but you've probably heard them. They are very secretive, but they do call a lot, and their call sounds like a ping pong ball dropping. So beep, 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 something like that. I'm not very good at their words. These birds are important in other birds to regulate the density of insects that are on manzanitas, kind of keep everything in a sustainable equilibrium. Very nice. Okay, we can move on to a more positive animal interaction, and that's pollinators. Manzanitas are principally insect pollinated, not exclusively. Bumblebees are one of the biggest ones, and that's because bumblebees come out early in the winter. Manzanitas are winter blooming plants. It's especially important for queen bumblebees that they have a source of nectar so that they have sufficient energy to get their broods going. It's a pretty high diversity of native bees. Osmia species and Bombus species are pretty abundant, as are adrenid bees, which are pretty small in comparison. Some of the adrenids have pretty small tongues, and they can't quite reach all the way. One of my favorite insects is the bee fly on the left, because they hover. And I don't know, there's something about a hovering insect that is not a mosquito trying to go for me that is very appealing. The picture on the right, you're seeing a small adrenid. They don't have a really long tongue, and sometimes the flowers are too long for their tongue to reach the nectary. So I'm going to blow up that picture so that you can see that someone has opened the side of the corolla, and that permits the shorter tongued bees to reach the nectary. Plant's not getting anything out of it, but the animals have figured out how to get around the adaptations of the plants. Too bad.
That's a good one. Yeah.
There are lots of other nectar and pollen dependent species. There has to be a little bit of pink or red in the flower to attract the hummingbirds. There have to be different odors to attract butterflies and moths. And the manzanitas are pretty effective at doing that. So when you think about the fact that they're attracting birds, they're attracting bees, they're attracting butterflies, and other kinds of pollinators, That's a huge diversity of odors and colors that they have to come up with to attract all of these things. And natural selection is fine tuning it and probably continuing to fine tune it. Oof, once you've got the flowers pollinated, you're going to have fruit growing. And this is important because this is the seed and that's the next generation. And I thought I'd show you what the inside of manzanita fruit look like because it's not a fruit you want to pop in your mouth and start chewing. The outer part, the exocarp and pericarp, are the outer part away from the seed, is edible. You can make a great tea out of it. It's high in vitamin C and other minerals. But if you look at the last column, the top row is all bigberry manzanita, and the bottom row is one called Eastwood's manzanita, Arctostaphylos glandulosa. But what you're seeing in C and F in the far right is just the nutlets or the part of the plant, the endocarp that is covering the seed, and it is proliferated into a bony structure, and it's kind of like a nut. And so they're small, and we call them little nuts or nutlets. And I want you to see the seed are actually pretty small compared to how much protection the plant has produced around them. These endocarps can protect them from consumers, from seed predators, but also in the soil, if there's a heat pulse from a fire, it protects the seed to some extent as well. So there's always more than one adaptation for almost any morphological trait that you can see. And I wanted to point that out because when you start producing fruit, we have a whole new wave of specialized insects that arrive. And as the fruit is just beginning to grow, there are very tiny insects that will lay eggs inside an individual seed chamber, and that will hatch, and the larvae will eat an individual seed. And there are lots of those species. Some manzanitas in some years can lose up to 80% of their seed by these seed predators. That particular fruit that you're looking at in the middle of this photo is a different kind of insect that has attacked that one. And instead of individual seeds, they laid an egg that is taking out everything and galling the fruit so that this is actually larger than it's supposed to be. And it has quite a large larvae in there that is consuming everything. And if you were to open it, it's kind of freaky, but then you realize that's just a larvae. Meanwhile, if you look at all the leaves around it, you can see there are other insects that have done some pretty good damage to this plant. I wanted to show you this particular fruit because if you look carefully, you can actually see little spots near the part of the fruit that is attached to the plant. And those are emergent holes where individual seed were consumed and the larvae burrowed its way out of the fruit. And I'll just point out some of those holes for you. It's pretty interesting. The manzanita fruit produce about 5 to 7 viable seed. And once they have all these insects, they usually end up with 3 or 4 that are still good. So each fruit still has viable seed in them. But imagine being a manzanita and you've made it through the herbivores, you've gotten pollinators, and now you're having to deal with all these different insects taking out your reproductive young. It's a very difficult world. Okay, we've got our fruit. We know they get buried somehow and they germinate after fires. But I want you to consider how is it that manzanitas actually create and maintain the seeds in the soil, and we call those seed banks. And the reason I want you to think about it is the fruit and the seed are much too large to bury themselves. It's not like a little tiny ceanothus seed that just rain or other kinds of soil disturbances can get it to find its way through the soil. These guys are way too big for that. So they have to have some kind of help. We have long distance dispersal, and these mammals do a good job of getting them from one place to another. The only problem is they leave everything on the surface. And that's not a good place. Uh, Also note that the fruit are mostly still intact. So they're not chewing on the seed. They are just dispersing it. The fruit need to get buried because, again, this is a wildfire habitat, and anything on the surface is going to get killed. Rodents are the way we create these seed banks. They are seed predators. They are efficient seed predators. But if there's a lot of fruit produced, they also store them in small caches so that they can eat them later. The good news is sometimes they don't live long enough. Their own predator takes out one of them. But probably more frequently, if you've ever walked the trails in San Pedro Valley Park, you know that some years the manzanitas produce a lot of fruit. And those years, it's so much fruit, the rodents can't eat them all, so they bury lots and lots of fruit. And they don't get around to eating all of them because it's an excessive amount. Meanwhile, their families reproduce and they're all ready for the next year. But manzanitas do an every other year thing, and the next year there's not much fruit produced. So it becomes a starvation year for the rodents. But whatever seed are produced, they probably eat them. So it's a every other year. Eventually, you start accumulating seed in the soil, though. Really a fascinating kind of interaction between the plants, the way they reproduce fruit, and the population dynamics of these animals and their behavior to create these buried seed caches. They're pretty effective. I'm comparing the size of the seed banks of Ceanothus and Arctostaphylos. On the left side where Ceanothus is, you can see their seed banks are pretty small. Some have been measured close to zero, but probably more typically it's a couple of hundred seed max per meter square. Arctostaphylos, on the other hand, you can see there's quite a range, but typically you're going to find something between 4,000 and 5,000 seeds per meter square. So a meter square, hold your hands out in front of you, not too close, and that's roughly a meter square. So you can tell there's going to be a lot of potential babies after a fire. Now the fire will kill off some of them, and not all of them are likely viable thanks to all those insects. There's still going to be 1,000 or 2,000 that are going to potentially germinate. It's a really successful way to create these seed banks. You have to prove that rodents are actually doing this. And I did do some experiments where you put fruit surrounded by a fluorescent powder. To get the fruit, the rodents have to cross through that powder and get it all over their feet and their tails, it turns out. And then you just have to come back the next morning and follow their trails. We did that, and we found 52 caches. Students and research techs found 50 of them. I was only, with a friend, was only able to find 2. When you get older, your vision isn't as good as when you're younger. And it's good to have the younger ones out there helping. I don't actually like to do this work anymore. So there we go.
Yeah, I can believe it.
We got chaparral, we have soil, the seeds buried in the soil. And what I'd like to point out is when you do get a fire, the upper part of the soil is not a safe place. The heat from the fire is just much too hot, and it will kill all the seed. The seed can tolerate up to about 125 degrees Celsius. It's a little bit over boiling water point, but it can't tolerate that. So you have to be deeper than that. And the good news is it looks like the rodent caches are mostly deep enough to survive even pretty high intensity fire. So the average is a little over 4 centimeters. That's roughly 2 inches. And soil is a really good insulator. So it's a pretty impressive thing that rodents are doing. And ecologists use some gibberish called directed dispersal. And all that means is that an animal dispersal agent is moving the fruit to an appropriate location where they might be able to germinate successfully and become a mature plant. Those places are called safe sites. So the English for this is rodents are doing a good job putting them where they need to be to survive a fire and germinate and get successful plants. After the fire, you got seedlings that come up emerging from those caches, and you got a new generation of manzanita individuals. And we find caching with every bloody manzanita species that I've been able to get to in a post-fire circumstance. Really cool. So rodents are creating these persistent seed banks. My question is, why don't rodents find the seed? Rodents have fantastic abilities to smell things that are buried in the soil. And that led me to a hypothesis that they can really smell fruit, probably, because fruit have all sorts of compounds associated with them. But maybe after the fruit is decomposed, the nutlets don't have any odor that they produce. And maybe they just can't detect that they're there. And so nutlets can accumulate. So here are fruit on the left and nutlets on the right. And the hypothesis is pretty simple. These guys produce odors that rodents can detect. The nutlets do not produce odors that are detectable by rodents. So a little experiment in the field with fresh fruit and nutlets that I sifted from the soil. Just created a large number of artificial caches, left them for 3 weeks, and then did a second experiment where I left them for 7 months and went back and retrieved them. And this is what I got. Basically, if you're old nutlets that have been living in the soil for a while, rodents aren't finding you very well. But if you're fresh fruit, they're doing a very good job. They can find you pretty quickly. Almost all of them, not quite all, but almost all of them. Only the older seed are really hiding from the rodents. And that means that you're going to accumulate nutlets through time, and rodents are only going to find them by chance after a while. So they're creating the persistent seed banks. The fruits produce odors that attract the rodents. The nutlets lack odors, and so they're hiding from the rodents, and that means they can accumulate as seed banks. Now, because these guys are seed predators, they're considered conditional mutualists, not a perfect mutualist. A mutualist ecologically just means that the plant is providing something to the rodent is providing something to the plant. In fact, these are just seed predators, and they do provide a mutualistic dispersal in big years with lots of fruit production. In small years where there's not a lot of fruit being produced, these guys are basically just seed predators. And that's why we call it a conditional mutualist. If it's all bad years, these guys are not mutualists at all. If it's all good years, they're great mutualists. They're also kind of cute. There's another group of conditional mutualists, but they're below ground. They're not really animals, they are fungi. And Mila wanted this in here, so I decided to keep it. Manzanitas usually live in really poor soils that are low in nutrients and water, and this is how they get around that. They have a mutualism with soil fungi that form mycorrhizae, which is a combination of fungal hyphae and roots, plant roots. And the hyphae move into the soil, locate organic compounds, decompose it, and the fungus moves the minerals to the plant. The plant exchanges sugars for that. So it's a good little mutualism. And they're pretty diverse. It's most of the fungi that you see when you walk around in the forest. This is what they look like. On the left is a conifer, a Pseudotsuga, Douglas fir, sorry, mycorrhizae, with a genus or a species, Poria terrestris fungus, that also forms mycorrhizae with manzanitas. On the right, that is a Arbutoideae type mycorrhizae. In other words, it's what the structures look like with Arctostaphylos and Arbutus. They're really similar morphologically, but there are some key differences, which is why they get a different name. Now, I call them conditional mutualists because they share so many fungi together that if a conifer seed lands in a manzanita stand, it germinates, and if its roots they will connect into the web of all these hyphae in the soil that are mycorrhizal. And because the conifer seedling is shaded, it's a carbon sink. And carbon in the mycorrhizae will flow into that little seedling. And so the tree is providing the sugars to the fungus, and the fungus is being parasitized now by the small tree seedling. But once that tree emerges from the canopy and begins shading the manzanitas, all of a sudden the fungi are now being parasitic on the manzanitas because when they're shaded, they can't produce enough carbon for themselves. So it's a very interesting world out there. And if you think about it, if you go hiking a lot, manzanitas are usually associated with conifers of some sort. And they form these mosaics that have a time frame of 1 to several hundred years where conifers invade, they take over, it becomes a closed conifer forest, and you end up with all the manzanitas dying. But there's always a fire. So we have a fire burning the forest that stimulates the manzanitas. Their roots and photosynthesis maintains the soil ecosystem that was also good for the conifers. The trees begin to invade. Later, it might be 10 years, it might be 50 years, it might be 100 years later, but eventually they will reinvade. And then that turns into a mosaic of conifers and manzanitas and eventually a closed forest. And now the manzanitas are just seed in the soil yet again. So it seems like it's a simple system, but boy, fire will come back. And it's this long-term cycle that occurs throughout California. It's something that if a human sees a fire going through a forest, we think of it as a crisis, a horrible event. For these plants, it's just another stage in a long-term cycle. Okay, so fungi aren't animals, but I wanted you to see the worlds that manzanitas are forced to occupy. Okay, some of the problems they have, they've solved, some not as well. A lot of them involve animals. And I want you to now reflect back on the fact that your senses are a little bit biased, but the plants themselves are having to deal with not only mammal senses of different types, but bird senses, the odors that insects pick up, toxins for the herbivores, all of that crazy world, lots of considerable compounds that repel insects, lots of wavelengths to attract in particular groups of insects and other animals to their flowers and also to their fruit. Enough fruit have to be produced to be dispersed with the right of rewards and odors, but the nutlets also have to lack odors so that rodents don't recover them and eat everything in the soil. And oh, they have to adapt to annual drought, really crappy soils, and the occasional wildfires. And they've done a really excellent job at doing that. So they produce these dormant seed banks that are helped by rodents. And I want to emphasize that because of this. That blue area, the central coast of California, from Santa Barbara to the Bay Area, this is the number of manzanitas you can find there. That's over 50 different taxa. Basically, manzanitas, because they have these seed banks, because most of them are obligate seeders, which means the fire kills them, and everybody coming out of the soil is now going to be fine-tuned to their new climate if it's changed. So they have fine-tuned to very narrow climatic and geological places, and those adaptations are preserved by their differentiating themselves from one another. And it required rodents to be able to make that happen. They had to be able to get those seed banks. So they are a central player in these systems because they do produce the energy for everybody else. And I want to end with a note about one particular manzanita, Arctostaphylos glauca. And this is something that occurred in October, and I don't know if you've heard about it yet, but the big berry manzanita, it's official. We have a state shrub of California, and it is a manzanita. So huge diversity, state shrub as well. Thank you, everybody.
Yippee, yippee, we have a state shrub. Thank you.
Yes, I
Okay.
thought you would like that.
Yeah, that's darling. Yes.
Okay, we've
Okay,
only got
let's.
3 questions in chat.
Okay, well, yeah, well, we got. Oh, yeah. Well, we've got to give people a chance to start writing. Let's see. I can change the view to something that's side by side, I suppose. No, that's not working. Okay. Oh, I know. Okay.
Let's see. Oh, I can start answering the questions.
Oh, yeah, well, yeah, go ahead. Let's see, what do we got?
Let's see. There was one by Karen Cotter. Oh, about the dung beetles. Yeah, that is amazing. They actually did great experiments to prove it. There's a video if you want to get on the web. There's a YouTube video that shows you everything. You should try to check that out. Just say deceived dung beetles or something like that. Can manzanita seeds ever germinate? Oops, it keeps jumping. Without having been activated by fire. In general, no, but if you run um, let's see, some kind of bulldozer through a manzanita stand, you sometimes get some seed, so that's not a perfect dormancy. If there's a road cut that's pretty new, the chemicals from automobile exhaust seem to be good enough. But in
Really?
general, you don't get very much germination without chemicals from smoke and a little bit of a heat pulse. Let's see.
These are
Any other questions?
Does Humboldt Bay fall into the geological criteria that you were
Um,
proposing?
it would. Humboldt Bay region has some unusual manzanitas, but the diversity is pretty low. But you get a little further inland and you've got a lot of geological craziness that should have some manzanita diversity, but it's pretty unexplored compared to other parts of the state. Um, let's see, manzanitas do produce tree rings or rings similar to tree rings. Individuals can probably live semi-indefinitely. I don't know of anyone that's aged one beyond 100 or 200 years. Um, but the ones that resprout, you lose all those rings and you get a whole bunch of new ones each time. So those can be centuries old. They could be 1,000 years old. Um, they might be 4,000 years old. We just really don't have any clue. Sometimes you go into a stand and you see a circle of manzanitas where you could get on the inside and lay down. Those plants have got to be pretty old, on the order of thousands and um, that kind of thing.
Let me just check this one and see.
Yeah, I'd like to see my face too.
Can any
Uh,
of these, can
I'm
any of
not
these,
sure about buzz pollination. Um, they do have the appropriate insects for that. I know that some manzanitas like Uber ursi are modified, so that doesn't occur. How can you germinate seeds at home? Good luck. I would put them in soil and put a bunch of litter on top and burn it. Um, take the seed, put them in moist paper and put them in the refrigerator for a couple of weeks and then put them outside in a pot, plant them, see what happens. If you have gibberellic acid, that really helps because you can fake out some of the physiological constraints. How well do fallen leaves and litter decompose? Very slowly, John Keener. If you go in an old stand of manzanitas, you can have 6 to 8 inches of litter sitting there. It takes quite a while for that to decompose. Can they be overwatered? Yes, rapidly. You need to water them in the first year if you plant them in a yard, but you don't really need to water them much after that, if at all. Maybe if it's a super dry year and you're on a south-facing slope, something like that. Okay, any other questions?
There's that Nancy has a question or something, but I don't know what it exactly pertains to. It says, can any of these survive under dense oak trees? Nancy, can there in the question section in the Q&A, there's a question, but I can't quite figure out what these mean, what these pertain to. It was 17 minutes into your talk, and I'm not sure. Can any of these survive under dense oak trees? So I'm not sure.
Well, so maybe just can any manzanitas survive under dense oak trees?
I don't know. Nancy, if you're still with us, can you perhaps clarify that a little more? Tom, you were mentioning at the beginning of your talk that manzanitas have been around for, what were you saying, 30 million, 30,000 years?
Um, Arbutus, the madrone,
Yeah.
relatives have fossils over 30 million years. Manzanitas have fossils back to 15.5 million years. That puts them into the middle Miocene, which was a warm time period, but there was some summer rain. And from that time period to about 5 million years ago, we got less and less summer rain until you would end up calling it a Mediterranean climate. So they had time to adjust.
So I thought angiosperms were in the latter, these last 5 million years per se, that they came into their, I know the flowering plants existed before that, but angiosperms per se seem to be, or what I've been hearing is that they've really come into their own in the last 5 million. So these plants go back way beyond that.
Yeah, we don't have a lot of fossils. We don't have the correct soils. California was mostly aquatic, except for the Sierra Inland Sea.
Uh-huh.
And in the Miocene, it was also a subduction zone. The coast ranges were islands of volcanoes. So um, the world is really different right now. Most of the manzanitas were in Nevada, in what was called the Nevada Plano, a very high plateau. So it was probably cold in the winter, that kind of thing. Let's see, somebody asked if manzanitas can survive under dense oak trees. Almost none of them can. If you have uh, Arctostaphylos regis montana or Andersonii, they can tolerate some shade. They're associated with redwood forests in the Santa Cruz Mountains. That's pretty much the only ones I know that can tolerate shade. Maybe Columbiana. Those are all big manzanitas, though. Okay.
Well, if they're shaded out, I don't think they'll do very well at all. I mean,
Right.
I mean, they need to create some food. Okay, so it seems as though, folks, if you have any more questions, you better send them in.
All right. Love to
Well,
talk to you guys. Thank you.
well, thank you so much, Tom. That was, yeah, that's what I said. It was going to be illuminating today, wasn't it? Love to
Let's see.
talk.
Somebody said that Catalina, they're in near Tucson. Yes, manzanitas grow there, but mostly to the north of you, the north of Tucson, and it's mostly the Mexican manzanita, Arctostaphylos pungens. Yeah.
Okay, so we're all done. All right.
All right.
Ruth Gravenis.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Tom, and take care. And I'll be in touch.
Okay.
All right.
Right. Yeah,
Take
thank you.
care. All right. So let me
Bye.
close.
Enjoy
right.
Butterfly Valley.
Yes, well, if we go up again, yes. But now we have a photograph up, which is great.
Yeah. We see it every webinar.
It's an easy way, not a long drive. Yes.
Right. All
Thank you
right.
for adding the part about the fungi and the mycorrhizal associations. Thank you very much. Yes,
You asked for it, you got it.
much appreciated. Yes.
Hmm.
All right.
All
So,
right. Good night.
cheerio. Okay, take care. Till next time.
Right.
So let me see. Okay, folks, I'm going to be ending the recording. Where do I end it?
I think no,
I'll just end the
the
webinar.
yeah, you end the webinar.
So if anyone's still with us, this is the end. Cheerio. We'll see you in February. Okay? Ciao, ciao. Good night, everyone.